Hi there, thank you very much for inviting me here. I've written so much over the last 10 years about the impact of American policies on the UK, so it's a real opportunity for me to be here and speak to an American audience. What I'm going to talk to you about today are some of the key themes in my book, Big Capital, Who is London For? It could equally be called Big Capital, Who is the City For? Because the themes I discuss in London actually pertain equally to North American cities such as Vancouver, New York, San Francisco, and I'm sure to a large degree Miami as well. Cities around the post-industrialized West in particular. And the title, Big Capital, is very much a self-conscious reference to Thomas Piketty's seminal book, Capital in the 21st Century, the main theme of which is that in today's economy, the income from rent or property is greater than the income from growth or wages. So most of us, if we own our own homes, actually will be earning far more money asleep than we will be by going to work. This is a quote from the former Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, who some of you may have heard of. And when he was mayor, he presided over a transformation of London. And it's that transformation I'm going to talk to you about today, a transformation brought about by a series of policies which came into play following the financial crisis of 2008, and then were actively stimulated by politicians like him. And he said, talking about the new look London, "I don't want to expel any oligarchs. Their cranes are sprouting across the city, and it's marvelous." And this is what the new London looks like. This is a new development called Elephant Park in a part of southeast London called Elephant and Castle. We'll come back to Elephant Park. It's an enormous new development built by the Australian property developer Lendlease. This here is part of the Vauxhall Nine Elms development. 30 new gated enclaves of luxury apartment building, actually, which includes the new American embassy, and also includes what's known as the Battersea Power Station complex, Frank Gehry, Norman Foster, Starchitect luxury apartment building. And of course, it goes without saying that there's no affordable housing in these sorts of spaces. This is one of my favorite slides. This is the Sky Pool, also in the same area, which is going to be suspended between 10-story towers. And this was pretty controversial for allowing the super rich the opportunity to swim, literally looking down on the people below. So that's one manifestation of this flood of capital into London, into all of this luxury apartment building that we've seen going up everywhere. But the other is this. These are the so-called super prime parts of London, the golden postcodes, the Mayfair, the Belgravias, the Kensington and Chelseas. This is what's called an iceberg basement. And this actually, more than the cranes, signifies of the real extreme wealth. And that wealth is hidden. And it looks like that. And actually, I always say at this point, archaeologists investigating today's London will find these underground constructions. And actually, a recent survey by Newcastle University has found that we have built 4,500 of these in these central parts of London just since the financial crisis. 3 stories deep, many of them swimming pools, cinemas, etc. Huge amount of wealth flowing into London. We have the most billionaires in the world choosing to locate there. So surely, lots of people would argue, isn't that a good thing? All of this wealth coming into the city, and it will trickle down to benefit the less well-off parts of the city which need it most. Well, actually, no. Wealth does trickle down, but it displaces. And it displaces by raising property prices and rents so that the people who lived in those areas, even in the very wealthy areas, can no longer afford to live there, and they get pushed out. The other big rhetorical canard is, isn't this gentrification? Gentrification, you know, this is a process that just simply somehow sort of happens. Well, actually, you know, we can debate gentrification. We don't have time to today. But I would say this is certainly not gentrification. The speed with which capital has changed London so profoundly just since the financial crisis cannot be equated with gentrification. To go back to Elephant Park, remember that first slide, it was built on the site of this. This was the Haygate estate, home to 3,000 people, predominantly on low incomes, but a quarter of whom owned their own homes under Margaret Thatcher's famous Right to Buy scheme. Demolished in 2014, this was Robin Hood Gardens, another estate. I haven't got time to show you the 100 or so estates in London in areas of high land values, which would be even higher when they have luxury development on them, which have since been demolished. This one here again is Robin Hood Gardens after the bulldozers had moved in. It's a rather brilliant image, I think, of capital literally looming through that demolished part of the building. And this slide here, well, this actually took place before the first bulldozer had moved in, and this is the marketing of Blackwall Reach, which is the new development to replace Robin Hood Gardens, and it was marketed at the Mandarin Oriental Hotel before Robin Hood Gardens had even been pulled down. It was marketed solely to foreign investors, 2-bedroom apartments from 500,000 to 611, and it was marketed off the plan before the building had even been built. I don't know if off-plan sales are allowed in the US. They're certainly not allowed in many parts of Europe. It builds in a structural instability because actually an investor will only buy 5% of the home in the first year, 10% in the second, and then the balance is paid on completion. So in a declining market, actually, that balance may never be paid. And when the developers say, we've sold 100% of the scheme, they haven't. They've sold 5% of 100% of the scheme. I'm just going to very quickly go, I haven't got time to tell you about the previous slide, which is, well, I will. Robin Hood Gardens, a section of it was purchased by the Victoria and Albert Museum to display in their new site in East London to open up a conversation about social housing. Not very popular, as you can imagine, with the residents who were displaced. Back to Elephant Park, prices from 750,000 to $1 million for a 2-bedroom apartment. 25% of this is affordable housing. But the definition of affordable housing has been changed to mean up to 80% of market rent or market value. Go figure. Okay, so what's happened to the tenants? Well, most of the council tenants have actually stayed within London. They may have been displaced 5-10 kilometres away from schools, local networks, but they've remained within the city on the whole. And look at what's happened to the homeowners. This really is the biggest scandal of all. The average price for a 2-bedroom property on the Haygate estate received in compulsory purchase, known as eminent domain over here, I think, was £100,000. What can you buy with £100,000 in London? Virtually nothing, which is why residents have been forced to move outside the city. And the physical and mental health toll that has taken is something that I document in the book and is really, really, truly harrowing. I don't think we've talked that much about the harrowing effects of that sort of housing displacement. So I'm just going to end here with a quite banal image, actually. And this is an image from Zurich, where the municipality there has said that all public land has to be used for joint ventures with housing cooperatives. Now, in London, all public land has to be used with joint ventures with private developers. So it just shows you how easy it is to have a different approach to housing, a different approach to the city, a different approach to diversity and inclusivity. It's really not rocket science. It's really easy. It just requires some policy tweaks, some policy change. changes. Obviously, things operate on two different scales. I think the smaller scale, like I'm showing you here, but that smaller scale can only take place within the framework of the much larger ideological shift that in many ways we've been discussing all day. That larger ideological shift, I don't think, can come through that prism that Tim described, that mass extinction prism. We've got to actually bear in mind how easily possible these things would be if we could just change our mindset. Thanks.